Hello and welcome to TEDxHSPH. My name is Syed Kashif Mahmood. I'm a student in the Masters of Public Health program in the Department of Health Policy and Management. I'm also a staff physician at the Massachusetts General Hospital and an instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School.
And my name is Melissa Shive. I'm also a Master of Public Health student in the Health Policy and Management Department here at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I'm a medical student at the University of California, San Francisco. Syed and I are both members of student government and the student organizers of TEDxHSPH. However, this event has been the hard work of many different people, and in particular, we'd like to recognize Amy Cohen, Nancy Perna, Sarah Bierce, Caitlin Hubbard, Chris Ternan, and the rest of the leadership studio team.
Now, we've all seen the inspiring and exciting videos on TED.com. TEDx is part of that larger community. The X stands for Independently Organized Event. TEDxChange is a collaboration between the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and TEDx. The event today is a collaboration between TEDx, TEDxChange, and the school. The event today has some history. We had our first TEDxHSPH event last year, and it was a phenomenal success. And going forward, we're hoping that we have this as an annual feature at the school. I would now like to introduce our moderator for the day. We're excited to have Meghna Chakrabarti moderating the event. As many of us know, Meghna is co-host on Radio Boston, WBUR, Boston's NPR radio station. And Meghna is an alumnus of the school. She graduated from the master's program at the Harvard School of Public Health. I'll let Meghna take it away.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor, actually, to be here, to be back here, especially. As Syed said, I am a member of the class 2001, Master's in Environmental Science and Risk Management from HSPH. So it's really been a delight to be part of the HSPH community since way back when. But without further ado, I'd like to actually introduce you to the people who you are here to see, and that is our panel, who you'll be discussing this major issue of why should we continue to invest in global health and development in this day and age. And you will be speaking with Michael Chu. He's Senior Lecturer of Business Administration at Harvard Business School. And obviously Jennifer Leaning, she's a professor of the practice of health and human rights at the Harvard School of Public Health, and also an associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And I had the honor of taking a class from her those many years ago. And now it is my honor to introduce to you to the Dean of the Faculty of Harvard School of Public Health, Dean Julio Frenk.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone to the Harvard School of Public Health and to this special event. It's really a great pleasure to have you all here. The topic we're going to be discussing is really important. We have been in the middle of what we could call a golden era of global health. When we look at the international investments for health, they almost tripled between the year 2000 and 2011. They went from about 10 billion to about 30 billion currently. Yet there are signs that those investments are flattening out. So asking ourselves, what are the results? Is it worth to continue this effort? Is a fundamental question, especially as the so-called donor countries are facing their own economic and fiscal crisis and are cutting or backing out of previous commitments. This is a very, very important question. What results do we get for this investment? One of the attributes and one of the reasons for this expansion in global development assistance is the fact that the health sector is perceived to be one that actually delivers results. I claim that the eradication of smallpox is the single most important feat in all of development assistance, not just for health. It's one of the most extraordinary achievements, from 50 million cases that we had in the 1950s to zero less than 3 decades later, the actual eradication of a whole disease. And now with the MDGs, we see still huge challenges, but the health-related MDGs are some where progress has been made, measurable progress. So there is a confidence that in health, because of our scientific foundation and our ethical orientation, our commitment to service, we actually get results compared to other development areas. And yet, those very investments are at huge risk as we speak. So answering the question, what do we get, will be very important. I think we will see that in addition to the human benefits, the life saved, the suffering avoided, we also see health investments contributing to economic prosperity and to global security. So if this is not the time to back out of those commitments, but it is the time to actually reinforce the message of accountability for results. And I think that's what the MDGs have brought. A unique movement in human history, the first time that every country on earth has committed to its peers and to its own people for a specific set of 8 goals with quantitative targets. And that includes every country, including rich countries, middle-income countries, and poor countries. That's the great contribution of the MDGs. And as we approach the deadline of 2015, I think this is the time to recommit to this orientation of accountability for results. So we are delighted that we will be part of this exciting discussion, that we will be connecting to Berlin, and that thanks to the magic of technology, we'll be participating in a global event. I am deeply grateful to the student government at Harvard School of Public Health, their commitment and their great participation in everything that affects our school, and for this effort, which I think enriches the experience of all of us here at the school and beyond our borders. Thank you very much and welcome again.
I want to just reintroduce you to our panel today. Mr. Michael Chu, lecturer at Harvard Business School, Dr. Jennifer Leaning from here at the Harvard School of Public Health, and of course Dean Julio Frenk as well. What we're going to do is each one of our panelists will just have a mere 1 minute to sort of give us your thoughts about what we've heard today, and then I'll have a few questions, and we'll absolutely open it up to audience questions as well, which I'm sure will be much more informative. We have a mere 25 minutes or so. We're going to try and wrap this up at 1:30, or as close to 1:30 as possible. So, Mr. Chu, your thoughts?
Sure. I think what we saw in TEDx today is about trying to approximate the condition that most of the world lives in to the potential that their lives could have. And I think that is something that is critical for public health. It is also critical for all kinds of the interventions that really matter, some of which were shown in TEDx, from latrines to maternal perinatal issues. It all concentrates on a couple of things. The first is delivery, and the second is delivering into huge scale. So thinking that public health is going to be threatened with a cut in funds, that forces us to think how we can do public health better in terms of delivery, more intelligent in terms of scale. And I think in that sense, there's a huge role to be played by a missing protagonist often, which is the private sector.
Thank you very much. Dr. Leaning?
I thought the presentations, each in its own right, did a wonderful job of making a pretty fundamental human rights argument. That the way in which the world is going to change for the better, given the ways in which so many of us want it to do that, will fundamentally rely on our way of listening and empowering people to take charge of their own lives. And that is a very difficult prospect when we speak of the scale of global health, the larger scale of the global private sector, the enormous power of national governments that are structured oddly. Often they don't listen to the mass and the wonder of their own voices in their own country. And this listening process, which the design speaker spoke to very well. I mean, there are many issues that he was dealing with that probably he hadn't studied, but he was listening and hearing back. And that is a subtle process. And one needs to encourage it. He was positioned to encourage it. But you saw children, just amazing children, and yet they were accompanied by people who were listening and helping them do their own geomapping of their own place of life. This issue of how do we encourage voices, which the Osawa talked about most beautifully. How do we encourage voices? How do we have people take charge of their own lives? And yet still, from the setting of the first world, actually provide the resources, the structures, the space, and the capacity to scale up. I think this is a very challenging balance. But holding on to a human rights lens in this, I think, is going to enable us to hear when we're off course and move when we think we are getting the encouragement from local ground.
Dean Frenk?
I agree very much with what Michael and Jennifer have said. And my reflection in listening to all of these excellent presentations is clearly, I mean, there's huge problems. And it's easy sometimes to sort of feel overwhelmed by them. But at the same time, I think they were all conveying a clear message that there are solutions, there are ideas, that was the theme, and that we can face them. That we have a track record. And I think in particular, in the health field, there is a track record of being able to address some of these huge challenges. But I would complement what Jennifer just said about the voices. Also encouraging all of us to listen to our own voices and start shifting our mindset. I think we need to stop talking about assistance. Fundamentally asymmetrical terms like assistance, donors, help. We're going to save these people. And start thinking that this is all about global solidarity, which is a very different concept. It's not this asymmetry that we have when we talk about development assistance. We should stop talking about donors and recipients and start thinking about people who assume co-responsibility for common problems. The problems of the women in Africa that are voiceless, it's not just the problem of the women in Africa, it's the problem of women all over the world. And the reason we have to intervene there is because that affects everyone, and we have a shared responsibility for our common planet. And I think now that we're really risking, because it's clear that the upward trend in development financing is plateauing and in some cases may be declining. I mean, some countries have actually completely backed out of their previous commitments. Unless we change the discourse and see this as an issue of global responsibility, and we talk about what is the national responsibility of each country in the world for the health of everyone, because it is a human right, and because it is a matter of global prosperity and security. It's in our common interest. I think the risks, if we don't change the discourse of cutbacks and pandering to local voters and taxpayers by saying, don't worry about those people, they're out there, it's not our problem. Why should we spend our taxpayer monies, which are scarce, on the problems of people who are not us? So I would encourage everyone to think about this notion of global solidarity as a construct that might also help us prevent a severe cutback in the funding for programs that, as we saw in all the presentations, have yielded very, very promising results.
Well, I just want to start us off, thank you all, with just two brief questions, and then I'm going to open it up straight away to the audience today. One thing that I took away from these talks, these are TED Talks, right? So it's all about ideas. But the panel of 4 TED speakers didn't include a single academic, right, so to speak. And in fact, Jeff Chapin started off, there was a very subtle line in his talk, which he said that he believes design enables better conversations than traditional research tools and also enables better solutions. And given that we're here at the School of Public Health, I thought that's a very compelling and kind of provocative thing. And I wonder, what do you make of the idea that that there may be possibly non-research oriented tools that may better affect change in many of these public health issues than maybe what people have actually been devoting their careers to here? Just want to throw that out to you.
Well, since I come from practice, I'll throw a provocative answer. I think that most research done is quite irrelevant. That doesn't mean that there isn't research that is very relevant. And the whole thing is to separate the two. There's a lot of research that will make absolutely no difference in the lives of the people in the world. And hopefully the system will do less of that and concentrate more on research that does change the lives.
Well, I found myself as a practitioner in public health, but here teaching methods and how you think about interventions. At Jeff Chapin's talk, I was writing down what were the baseline rates of diarrhea, how do you measure uptake of this, what is the sustainability of this, where is the funding coming from, how do you maintain cleanliness, is he capacity building? And then I stopped making a list because as it unfolded, he actually had dealt with a lot of those issues in part because he's very bright with great ideas, and in part, again, because he was listening. Those women entrepreneurs that were going out and scaling up and saying $5 off for this, buy bulk, et cetera, he didn't teach them that. That was part of what they were actually, because they're market women, you know, they do their own ways of handling the market. So that I think that the usefulness of academics when you're dealing with innovation can actually be overstated. And I agree with what you're saying, and you know this field very, very well. But I do believe that in the ways you train and prepare people to work in these very complicated areas, it is important to have teachers who are thinking and writing, who engage in practice, who come back and reflect, to interact with the very pure academics who challenge you on what your own premises are. So it's a part of a dialogue that, from my perspective, means that academics are involved in preparing people to be most effective in the world.
What I would challenge is the whole divide. This is a Cartesian inheritance, that it's the same thing as the mind and the body. The notion that there's a separation between ideas and action is fundamentally flawed, because, you know, action without the power of ideas is disorganized activism. And ideas that don't get tested in the world of action simply become irrelevant. Here in this school, we say that we defend two values: excellence and relevance. And they are not a trade-off. You can pursue both. You can be excellent in the adherence to the highest standards of scientific inquiry, and at the same time be extremely relevant. Now, you know, all of the presentations actually illustrate this. We wouldn't be talking about latrines if there hadn't been the discoveries about, you know, the microbial origins of diarrheas, right? Who would be thinking about that? Melinda Gates was talking about contraception. Well, the fact that actually those tools have been developed comes from research done in universities about the biology of reproduction, and from, you know, the development of technologies that allow couples to be empowered with the tools to control their own fertility. The German parliamentarian talking about climate change. You know, that comes from fundamental discoveries in physics and chemistry and atmospheric sciences. All the issues around women's health have clearly benefited from, you know, a lot of research that goes into some of the fundamental issues. And it's not just in the natural sciences, in the social sciences, we actually understand cultural differences, cultural interpretations, and societal structures that constrain the freedom of women, for example. So I like us to challenge the idea. I always like to say that we need to mobilize the power of ideas to shape the ideas of power, the idea of those with power to effect change. But it's the power of ideas, and those ideas are genuinely generated and germinate and tested and then spread through education in universities. That's been our role. But I think your point is very well taken. We need to break out of the model of an ivory tower and engage in what in this school we have emphasized a lot, which is the whole process of knowledge translation. But look at it as a comprehensive process that includes the creation of knowledge through research, the reproduction and recreation of knowledge through education, and then the translation so that knowledge guides action. And when action happens, we close the circle by studying the consequences of human action. A lot of well-intended interventions have failed because people did not evaluate them and did not generate the shared learning that enables and perpetuates that circle of knowledge. I think if we all think that knowledge is the powerful tool we have to effect purposeful social transformation, then we can engage in this circle, which includes action and knowledge that gets created in action. And let's just get out of this idea that one thing is the world of action, the other is the world of knowledge. They're part of an integral and self-sustaining circle that drives enlightened social transformation. The unenlightened part, the one that's based on ignorance, prejudice, discrimination, exclusion, we have many historical examples of. Knowledge is our vaccine against that. So we should do nothing to devalue either part of that equation, because many of the people who are out in the field are empowered by the fruits of knowledge.
Well, I have several other questions, but I would actually just prefer to throw it open to members of the audience. Does anyone have a question for the panel?
Hello, good afternoon, panel. I'm Olagoke. I'm a student in the HSPH. My question is to Dean Frenk and Michael, Professor Michael. It's been argued that indefinite aid to Africa has been an incentive for corruption, and it has led to African government shirking their responsibility of providing public goods. I'd like to hear what you think about that. And then I'd just like to make a comment that I believe that the aid should be conditional now, and there should be a varying rate of exit strategy in different African countries, and also the limited funds that we have currently should be geared towards leadership training and governance. Thank you.
Well, let me just start. I think your question is excellent, and it reflects the need to move into a different frame. Because so long as we use this asymmetrical language, aid is a very asymmetrical word, right? And we start thinking about the language of co-responsibility for shared problems. Then you get exactly those consequences. The language of aid is a language of aid assistance, it's a language of dependence. And we need to move into a language and a mindset of interdependence. It's in everybody's interest to have an Africa that is growing and developing. It is the fastest growing, in economic terms, region of the world right now. And a lot of the future prosperity of the West and of the emerging economies like India and China is going to be founded in Africa. There is an interest for everyone, starting with Africans, but also for the rest of the world, in good, healthy development. So these are shared problems. I think if we understand that we are living in an interdependent world, and that the problems of everyone in the world affects everyone, then we can develop a different frame. And so it's not just the help or aid that comes from rich countries to poor countries that then may lead to the issues you're pointing out of corruption, but one in which we're all mutually accountable. Now, there have been some progress. As you know, there's the Paris Declaration and the AGRA principles for, unfortunately, they are called aid effectiveness. The first measure for effectiveness would be to change that word. But there are principles now of country ownership, and especially of transparency and accountability. But for that, we need the spread of democratic ideals. We need governments to be accountable to people, and to give good account of the use of resources wherever they come from. I think changing the paradigm will help us deal with some of the unintended consequences of the traditional models of aid that you point out.
Let me just add one quick comment to that excellent answer. What I think is that the funds transferred to Africa to solve deep problems, the fact that they haven't worked doesn't negate the need for the world to tackle the issue in a holistic way. It just means that those of us that care about this have to face up to the challenge of figuring out better ways of doing it so that they become effective. If you look at the amount of funds that have been doled out in terms of this old model, it's a travesty that we have advanced so little. But this is what we all need to do, figure out better ways of doing it.
Hello, Priya Agrawal, Women in Health Initiative. Following on from that question, in context of solidarity and co-responsibility, what is your ideal vision of incorporating the private sector to fight the battles that we're fighting and prevent them becoming yet another donor?
Well, I think, when we look at the world's problem in terms of the 4 billion people that live in some degree or another of conditions that we shouldn't accept. One of the problems is the powerlessness of the people. But actually, people, this 4 billion do have a power, because most of them bring food to the table because they're paying for it. Nobody's giving to them for free. So in my view, one of the great potentials is to actually look at all these people as people that have economic power, which they do. And there's a study that has recently, in trying to understand this 4 billion as a market, that says that, and I think it's a very, very conservative study, that has basically said, if you look at it from a purchase price parity adjusted basis, this is a $5 trillion market, dollars a year market. And so I think it's up to us in the private sector and business to figure out the models that can provide much better value proposals in things that matter, like healthcare and education and housing, so that people that are already spending will get a much better deal.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
Well, I think to build on this in a way I don't think you will find improper is that those 4 billion people also have a lot of political power once mobilized, once they realize they have the reins in their hand. I mean, there are many reprisals for political power, and there are many places of jeopardy in terms of operating economic power, because you could get cheated very easily by people who know how to cheat you. But the social media, I think, provide a really fascinating way to level the playing field, because that is knowledge transfer horizontally. So you can talk about the corrupt person that's trying to tell you something to do and to distort your markets. You can talk about somebody who is actually abusing his or her local community because he's abusing his office. I'm very interested in a more kind of horizontal discussion about what people want, and then having them insist upon obtaining it. It will be messy. It's going to be very messy. But I think we're at our peril, we ignore the possibility in what I'm concerned might be a dominant world's search for consistency, coherence, and predictability. If we're going to unleash some of this market power and some of this political power, we have to be prepared that there are going to be some things arising that we hadn't expected, and we're going to have to be able to move, I think, quickly and positively in response to those.
For sure.
What I would add to this question is, again, probably to try to move beyond the dichotomous nature of the debate. It's very often portrayed as the private versus the public sector, and think that, you know, what we have in every society is a mix, and the key is to get the mix right. The public sector, which if it's, you know, emerges from a democratic process, emerges from the private will of citizens. There's no divide there, right? It's supposed to be legitimate. So legitimate governments have a number of functions that only they can provide. For example, creating conditions for a level playing field, creating rules of the game, making sure that everyone follows those rules to avoid abuse and so forth, making sure that their sources of legitimacy, which is the vote of people, is respected. That's a role of government. Governments have a fundamental role in either directly providing or mandating financing for healthcare, because we know that that's an area where private insurance markets exclude the sickest members of society just because of the nature of that industry. So those are fundamental obligations, creating rules of the game, assuring that no one is excluded. Once you create that framework, then of course you have an enormous field for private sector creativity and innovation in delivery models, like we've heard, in technological innovation. But the key is to get the mix right and to understand that it's not public versus private, it's public and private serving the collective interest. Now, private enterprise has a profit motive, and that's perfectly legitimate if the rules of the game are fair, if you're avoiding exploitation and monopolies and so forth, then it's fine. That's where you mobilize the talent and the innovation, and you reward the talent and innovation. But that's not because the government is stepping back. It's because the government is creating the conditions.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's really worth emphasizing that nobody would want markets without regulation, because that is the jungle, and we've seen it. Mm-hmm. We've also seen quite recently that bad regulation or the lack of regulation can actually cause the near death of Western civilization. And so the framework with which this must take place is absolutely important. But I think what you all in the School of Public Health and for us as academics, what we need to do is challenge the assumptions that really represent the orthodoxy of today in understanding what that mixture has to be. Because right now, Dean Frenk has made reference to this false dichotomy. The private sector cannot replace the public sector. And I think a public sector replacing all of private sector, we've also seen examples of how bad that can be. But we're struggling, I think, especially in the developing world, to find a mixture that really can optimize both. And we do need both if we're going to bring things like effective healthcare to the majority of the people.
Well, on that note, we just basically have a minute to go, so I actually would just want to leave everyone with a thought that I had, and if you'd like to comment, please do, but you have to be sure the taskmaster back there has waved the 2-minute warning to me. But the other message, the sort of subtext that came through loud and clear to me through all these talks, it had something to do with what you said, Dr. Leaning. Jeff Chapin talked about having his eyes opened that families wanted the hand washing station in the kitchen because that was where they might infect others versus themselves, and that was what really mattered. And obviously, Teosawa talked about seeking out voices of people who aren't usually invited to the table, and those children in Kolkata who between themselves said, we're showing our neighbors that we care, and that gets them to action. I found it remarkable that through all of these talks, a basic truth that when people are told and shown that they are cared about, that creates a sort of power at the grassroots level, whether it be by their neighbors, by the international community, by academics, whatnot. So I guess my the last question, which I'll have all of you answer briefly in 10 or 20 seconds, is do you have an actual example from your own field of work where you saw the power of that care actually creating some sort of change, whether it be small or large, that sort of got at this big picture of public health in the 21st century?
Of course, I've been involved with the development of commercial microfinance, and at the heart of that is giving people real choice, and it is the empowering of the people.
I see it in human rights work in conflict zones a great deal. People who are extraordinarily abused and forced to leave home and very fearful are in solidarity with you when you come and say, we can't help you right now, but we want your story, if you will tell it to us, so that we can begin to mobilize a larger community for concern and help. And the help we get from people in what that story is, the translators who risk things, the drivers who risk things, the people who walk a long way to talk to us, it's all part of not their own well-being. There's a general sense, because this is, in ethics, you do this. You say, we are here and what we're going to learn from you is not going to help you directly. Is it still okay for us to learn from you? And they, at a considerable amount of jeopardy to their own safety, they will say, yes, we want to tell you what happened so it won't happen for others somewhere else.
Well, my example of people who care are our students. And I want to take my 20 seconds to thank Syed and Melissa for having organized this. But our students are a great example, and also you, Meghna, as a former student, of the greatness of our students who are really here because they care, and thanks to all of you who made this possible.
So true. Dean Julio Frenk and Dr. Jennifer Leaning and Mr. Michael Chu, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise today. Thank you. And thank you everyone else.
Thank you.